Chapter 18 Shitters Full. The Third Hell. Syncroft, Karsten's home.
Attention, citizens. We thank you for your patience and understanding during these confusing times. We are aware that the bug we have all been experiencing together has yielded new and troubling effects, including the ability for prisoners to deal damage to citizens. We ask that all citizens find safety in any of the strongholds for the duration of the lockdown while we work to remedy this situation. To all low-ranked or inexperienced citizens, do not engage the prisoners. We have not yet corrected the respawn bug. If you are killed by a prisoner, you too will become a prisoner. We ask that you do not panic. Simply find shelter. To all experienced citizens, while we will not force you to do anything, we do advise finding shelter. The members of the military that are currently logged in are working to suppress the prisoner uprising. You may assist them, and if you do, the rewards will be great, but we ask that do so warily. Do not, I repeat, do not engage groups of touched that number 5 or more. This situation is in the process of being rectified, citizens. We thank you for your patience and cooperation. Praise Durana. Praise Sidro.
By the brothers, what have you done, Sage? Crinan asked as he stopped and listened. Everyone can fight now? Crinan paused as he walked and looked down at the floor. Wait, if everyone can fight, that means... Show me my ranking. Avatar information sheet. Name, Pretty Kitty 6969420. Rank, 28,070,737,140. Percentile, 95%. Player rating, 1 star. HP, 190 of 190. 100 base plus 90 buff. Shields, 245, 100 base plus 90 buff, plus 55 armor. Damage output, 2 times base. Base plus 0.9 times buff, plus 0.1 times weapon. Speed, 1 times base. What the fuck? Crinan snapped. He watched as his ranking grew higher and higher by the second. Fucking Sage! He realized what was going on and then remembered Sage had mentioned empowering everyone back in the Expanse, or whatever it had been called. The prisoners were rising up with their new ability to fight. They had all been turned into players, and the entire ranking system had become even more volatile. At least 26 billion prisoners, Crinan whispered, shaking his head. This is fucked up. It must have happened while he slept. The Hells had broken into war overnight, and Crinan's ranking had been completely wiped out. He sighed as he realized he was going to have to do some serious killing if he wanted to rank back up to where he needed to be. Sit! Karsten's voice broke through Crinan's thoughts as he walked into the kitchen. Crinan noticed Malinka and Ander were both seated at the table, and before them were crude wooden plates piled with heaping helpings of gray mush. Malinka stared deeply at the food before her with a look of disgust spread across her face. Crinan grinned at her expression and remembered the spoiled brat he had first met back in the Wilshire Highlands back in Camelot. Ander, on the other hand, eagerly forked the goop into his mouth. He wore a look of delight as he stuffed his face and moaned as each spoonful passed his lips. Truly a delight to be able to wake up to breakfast, Ander commented with a full mouth. Something about it manifests great feelings of nostalgia. I thank you for that, Master Karsten. All right. Karsten shrugged indifferently as he leaned against the countertop and drank his coffee. Glad you could join us, Crinan. Crinan glanced over and rolled his eyes after Karsten made his presence known. Karsten, in turn, extended an open palm toward the table, gesturing for Crinan to sit. Crinan did as he was told and took a seat.
What is this stuff anyway?
Malinka asked as she poked at the thick, wobbling pile of mush in front of her.
You try it yet?
Karsten called back. He had his back to her as he prepared Krynen a plate.
I did not.
Malinka replied. You should, Ander insisted. It's not every day that you get to eat in the hells. Truly an unexpected treat.
Truly,
Malinka repeated. Karsten walked up and dropped a plate in front of Krynen. Krynen looked down and noticed that the gray mush jiggled like gelatin but looked much denser. It was thick and lumpy and had no smell. Krynen stared at his food and then looked up at Karsten. Yeah, I'm not eating that, Krynen said, sliding the plate back toward Karsten.
I think I will have to pass too.
Malinka agreed, pushing her plate away as well. Karsten raised an eyebrow and placed his hands on his hips.
Well, your highnesses, I apologize my hospitality was not up to snuff for you two,
Karsten said with a hint of scorn in his voice.
Next time I'll ensure I have big fat juicy steaks and taters for your tender taste buds. I reckon I can conjure up a few flutes of champagne as well for you two, you precious things.
Oh, fine,
Malinka said, pulling her plate back to herself.
You don't have to make us feel bad.
Once again she stared at her gooey meal and her nostrils flared. Slowly she dug her spoon in and gently brought it to her lips, cringing as the paste hit her tongue.
Oh, that's weird,
Malinka said, her expression softening.
You like it?
Karsten asked, leaning against the table with a smug look on his face.
I wouldn't say like,
Malinka replied. She brought another spoonful to her lips and popped it in her mouth.
It tastes like bread. It's not bad. What is it?
Gravelin shit,
Karsten said. Malinka slowly swallowed and gently placed her spoon back on the table.
As in, parts of Gravelin?
Nah, Karsten replied. It's gravelin poop. Fills your belly. Makes you a little tougher, too, depending on how much you eat.
Krynen snickered and stood from the table. See where manners gets you, Lady Malinka.
Shut your mouth,
Malinka replied. A new look of disgust was plastered over her face, and she slowly stood from her chair and looked to Karsten.
Where is your bathroom?
Shithole's out the front door. Take a left, you'll see a small building. I warn you, though,
Karsten said. Malinka didn't waste any time. She hurried out the front door with her hand raised to her mouth. Karsten shrugged and looked at Krynen.
Shitter's full,
Karsten snorted with a half smile. Krynen couldn't help but feel an evil sense of joy at that. 'Twas a delight. Ander released a tender burp and pushed his plate forward. A wonderful treat. Ander, you heard when Karsten said it was shit, right? Krynen asked. Oh yes, I knew what it was, Ander replied. We are in the hells, dear boy. Haven't you been paying attention? Here you eat what is available. Or not at all, Krynen added. We don't need to eat to survive, right? Correct, Ander replied.
Eating is a way to strengthen yourself in the cities, Karsten added. Eating can give you increased damage output or speed or whatever for a time. It's a perk of staying alive in the cities. Outside of here, we prisoners have no ability to fight or any way to really live for any amount of time, so eating can increase the probability of our survival here, even if it's gravelin shit.
But that's all changed now, Ander said. Thanks to Krynen's benefactor, no doubt, it seems the prisoners now have the ability to fight back, to defend themselves. Everything has changed. I foresee the world outside Sincroft being unrecognizable once the other prisoners discover this.
That'd be something to see for sure,
Karsten commented as he shrugged on his duster jacket. He clipped on his pistol belt and slid a knife into a sheath on his thigh, and then placed his wide-brimmed hat over his blonde dreadlocks.
Time to get going, then, Karsten said. We got some ground to cover if we want to get you three out of my hair today. Which we do want to do.
Krynen joined Ander and Karsten at the front door. As he neared, he smiled, for he heard Malinka heaving outside. He didn't necessarily want her to experience discomfort, but he figured he might as well enjoy it while it lasted.
We ready then, boys?
Karsten asked as he reached out and grabbed the doorknob. Krynen nodded, and the trio walked outside.
Come on, tough lady,
Karsten said as he strode past Malinka. She had apparently opted not to vomit in the outhouse, choosing instead to throw up all over the dusty alley road. Krynen wondered if that had to do with the fact that the shitter was full, as Karsten had so eloquently put it, or simply because her stomach was just as sensitive as it had been back when she was a teenager. Krynen smiled at the memory that followed. Krynen recalled having speared a fish in the river that the two had jumped into from a cliff that had to have been many dozens of feet in the air. He'd taken a bullet from the Govians that had driven the two of them toward the cliff, but it ended up being a superficial wound. All that had been harmed was Krynen's pride, for he recalled crying like a baby in front of Malinka as she dug the projectile out of his flesh. The fish was long and slimy.
It looks like a penis,
Malinka had said.
Well, I think.
Krynen remembered laughing at that. In his experience, penises had not been slimy, or very long for that matter. He remembered handing the penis fish, as it became known, to Malinka, and the look of disgust that spread over the spoiled noble brat's face as she wrapped her hands around it. The fish wasn't dead, it squirmed and wiggled in her grasp, and she leaned her body back as far away from it as she could, turning her head in revulsion. Eventually, the girl broke into tears, leading Krynen to take the fish and did his best to clean it. That was when Malinka threw up. Convincing Malinka to eat the fish had been a difficult task. Seeing its insides had repulsed her and severely turned her off to eating the creature's flesh. Eventually she ate, however, and she even said she liked it. Ander nudged Krynen in his side and forced him to snap out of his reverie. Karsten had walked over to a black wooden building that looked like it was about to fall over and slid a door open.
Come on,
Karsten yelled, the two words melding into one.
Get your lazy crunchy asses up. Let's go, yeah!
Krynen watched as a dozen touched shambled out of the building and lined up on either side of Karsten.
Follow me,
Karsten ordered them and walked back to the rest of the group.
Hopefully we don't need them, Karsten said as he approached. But if we do, they're here.
How do you control them like that?
Malinka asked, wiping the corners of her mouth with her arm.
Why do they listen to you?
'Cause I don't kill 'em, Karsten replied. I give 'em shelter, food, and I bathe 'em and give 'em scraps of garbage to play with. Hell, sometimes I even talk to 'em in those few moments that they snap out of their psychosis.
What do you mean you bathe them?
Malinka asked, cocking her head.
I haven't seen any water here.
Dust bath, precious,
Karsten replied.
Cleans 'em up good. Animals all over the world clean themselves with dust since the dawn of time. Works fine for touch, too.
Dust?
Malinka sighed.
Of course.
The group exited the alley and emerged on one of the many sidewalks of Sincroft. Krynen noted that not much was different. The city was still as sullen and depressing as it had been when he had fallen asleep. Its inhabitants, seemingly nearly the point of being touched themselves, shambled around in their dirty, unkempt clothes. They didn't talk, they didn't laugh. They just walked. Krynen couldn't help but stare at them as he walked. If I ever end up like that, shoot me, Krynen muttered to the group. Malinka snorted and looked up at him.
You're already like that,
she said.
Sulking, silent, need your space like that edgy badass warrior you think you are?
Can I have one day where you don't try to insult me as painfully as you can? Krynen barked at her. Like, I don't need you to be a bitch to me. Believe it or not, it's not something that helps me in any way.
Oh, I'm not trying to help. Just trying to see if you still cry, sad boy.
She smiled innocently and shoved Krynen in the shoulder. Coincidentally, it was in the exact same spot she had pulled the bullet out so many years ago. And for some reason, he kind of liked the shove.
Will you two shut the hells up? Karsten snapped. By the brothers, your incessant bitching and moaning is the most annoying thing I've heard in centuries, and I live in hell. Shit makes me glad I'm dead.
Ander chuckled lightly at Karsten's words, and Krynen sneered at him. He looked over at Malinka, who was once again glaring at him, and all he could do was shrug his shoulders and let it all go for the moment.
All right, now y'all listen good,
Karsten said once peace had returned to their group.
Croftkeeper and city gates spawn in random places throughout the day, but they're always together. Croftkeeper guards the gates, see?
Karsten called back to the others.
Now, I ain't under some sort of delusion that y'all's gonna actually beat 'em. I hope for your own sakes that you do, but it's pretty unlikely. Either way, you won't be in Syncroft much longer. Y'all will either start back at the first level or proceed to the next level. Don't matter to me. One thing I've gathered about the Croftkeeper is that every day there's one location in specific he for sure spawns at. City walls by the marketplace. That's where we're headed. We go there, we wait, and when he spawns, I'm going back home and leaving y'all to it. And that will be the end of our agreement. Fair enough?
Sounds good, Krynen said.
Fantastic, Karsten said. Just need to follow this road till it ends to get to the marketplace. Here soon we...
Get on the ground!
An authoritative voice suddenly shouted.
By order of Bishop General Klaus, you are all under arrest!
What the fuck? Krynen shouted at the sudden yelling. He looked around and saw nobody. Nobody, that is, until he felt something hard slam against his temple. In a daze, he stumbled to the ground and suddenly felt a great force on top of him.
Face on the ground, fucker!
The voice continued. It was a Govian-accented voice, and its tone demanded attention. Krynen thought back to the fight with the dagger-wielding Govian assassin after he saved Malinka. He realized at that point that he was a target of Bishop General Klaus, leader of the militarized Govian police force, the Inquisition.
Hands behind your back,
the Govian commanded, planting a knee into Krynen's back.
You're coming with us.